to his calls with foreign leaders. He considered the idea during an interview yesterday, less than 1 year after the whistleblower complaint about such a call sparked his impeachment. Take a listen.
That call was perfect, and I say it again. It was perfect. It was totally appropriate. And it wasn't one call, it was two calls. They were both perfect, appropriate calls.
Why are so many people allowed to listen to your phone calls anyway?
Well, that's what they've done over the years. When you call a foreign leader, people listen. I may end the practice entirely. I may end it entirely.
Joining me now to discuss, Democratic member of the House Intelligence Committee, Raja Krishnamoorthi. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Bianna.
So at this point, we've come to realize that whatever the president may be telegraphing really should be taken seriously. So in that light, what do you make of this possible change of protocol?
I think it's very disturbing. It would continue a pattern of potentially disturbing behavior. Recently, after the president had a one-on-one meeting in person with Vladimir Putin, he had the notes of that particular meeting confiscated and potentially destroyed. Now, what he's suggesting that would happen with regard to a call with a foreign leader is that those notes would not be even taken in the first instance. And this is problematic because from a counterintelligence standpoint, if a foreign government knows what's said on those calls, and we don't know what's said, or the American public doesn't know what's said on those calls, what is said could be used against the president and be used as leverage. That's called compromat.
We've learned a lot about what compromat means over the past few years, but what strikes me, and I'm glad you make this point, because what strikes me about these calls is that they're monitored to actually protect the president as well as obviously U.S. national interest. I mean, they're highly coordinated. They include typically dozens of officials. As a member of the Intel Committee, what does it tell you when the president seemingly wants to conduct foreign policy in secret?
Well, I think that it begs the question, why? What does he want to say on those calls that he doesn't want other people to listen in on? That's the first point. And then secondly, it basically opens up the possibility that separate back channels are created, such as with Rudy Giuliani and others, where we have a shadow foreign policy, which operates not in the best interest of the United States, but in the best interest of potentially Rudy Giuliani's clients, including Donald Trump in his political or personal capacity, as well as others who we don't even know.
Right. I mean, you have the president just yesterday finally admitting that he did send Rudy Giuliani over to Ukraine after saying that that wasn't the case. But it also seems to be an effort at avoiding another whistleblower coming forward, right? Or another Lieutenant Colonel Vindman from sounding the alarm when they hear something that doesn't follow protocol.
That's exactly right. I think that he's, apparently trying to shield his conversations from the possibility that others might come forward and expose wrongdoing associated with those conversations. I think that it's a good thing for more people to be listening in. And also, not only does it help to potentially expose wrongdoing or to deter the president from engaging in wrongdoing, but it's really essential for coordinating our national security as well as diplomatic policy and even defense policy. It's really important that other parts of the government know what the president has said or maybe even agreed to in these calls, and then to follow up accordingly. Now, if they're in the dark, it just makes them less effective.
Yeah, and very complicated as well. Let me get you to weigh in on what we just discussed with the previous panel, and that's the president's latest apparent quid pro quo, this time via tweet, directed at the governor of New York. This is something that impeachment managers warned would happen. Let me play for you what Hakeem Jeffries said just 2 weeks ago.
Grants allocated to cities or towns or municipalities across the country, but the president could say, you're not going to get that money, Mr. Mayor, Mrs. County Executive, Mrs. Town Supervisor, unless you endorse me for re-election. The president could say that to any governor of our 50 states. That's unacceptable. That cannot be allowed to happen in our democratic republic.
Well, the president appears to have done just that. I'm not even sure the impeachment managers would have expected this to play out as quickly and so quickly post-acquittal. Do you think that this falls into the category of an article of impeachment, as Shanwu sort of alluded to as well, at least as obstruction of justice or Congress? And if so, what should be done about it? Because it likely could continue to happen again.
I'm not sure about that, but what I am sure about is that we have to be much more vigilant in our oversight role. I'll just give you an example. I think that, the Homeland Security Secretary, when he comes before Congress or she comes before Congress or their deputies, they are always asking for either more resources, authorization for new programs, or modifications to existing ones. And at this point, I think we have to be much more vigilant with regard to answering or accepting their requests in light of what you just talked about with regard to Governor Cuomo. I mean, we basically have to start to condition our granting of these additional resources or the modifications based on good behavior. And unfortunately, the White House is not showing that. And now I think we're going to have to be much more aggressive in our oversight.
And I should just correct myself. Obviously, I was referring to abuse of power and not obstruction of Congress, but it's interesting to get your perspective on that as well. Congressman Krishnamurthy, thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Brianna.
And coming up, the debate over health care is still front and center in the Democratic race. And now a powerful union in Nevada says it won't back any candidate for president. What does that mean? Well, we're just over 1 week until the Nevada caucuses, but today Democratic presidential candidates are fanning out across the country. Just take a look. They're visiting states from coast to coast, not just Nevada, and with some already looking ahead to Super Tuesday states like Texas and California. But in Nevada, another battle is brewing over health care. Now the state's culinary union, one of the largest and most politically active unions in the country, says it will not endorse a candidate. It's also slamming Senator Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plans. And last night, Pete Buttigieg took another swipe at his political rival.
What I am proposing is that we create, I call it Medicare for All who want it, a public plan. Anybody can be part of it, but we're going to let you decide whether you want it. I'm thinking, for example, of the culinary workers here in Nevada who fought so hard, those strikes and those negotiations to get excellent health care plans. Who are we to tell them that they have to give up those plans? And I was especially upset to see that union leadership was being attacked for standing up for their workers.
Really taking advantage of a moment there. Joining me now, CNN political correspondent Abby Phillip and former White House communications director under President Obama, Jennifer Psaki. Ladies, welcome both of you. Abby, let me start with you because Nevada is certainly an important state in this race. But what is going on with this culinary union?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating political story in which you have that really powerful union basically deciding yesterday to say we are not endorsing at all. But they got to that point after making a really strong statement directed at Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan. The union basically put out a pamphlet right after Sanders won the New Hampshire primary saying Medicare for All would end the culinary health plan as they know it. That was a really strong statement that they did not make about any of the other candidates on that pamphlet. And what it resulted in, according to union leadership, is a lot of attacks. They said they received phone calls, emails, their personal information put online, and that they were basically being threatened by Sanders supporters. In response to that, Bernie Sanders basically implied that maybe some of these attacks were not actually coming from his supporters. He says, anybody making personal attacks against anybody in my name, it's not part of our movement and we don't want them. But it really has created a lot of chaos that, as you can see in that clip, candidates like Pete Buttigieg are trying to take advantage of, where the union is not making a statement to endorse someone, but the moderate candidates clearly see an opening here to say that we are not necessarily for Medicare for All that would end private insurance. Buttigieg has a plan that would basically allow people to buy into Medicare for All, and then you have Biden, who has clearly opposed Medicare for All. Amy Klobuchar clearly opposing Medicare for All. So it's really kind of an opportunity for some of these moderate candidates to get in there and try to vie for these votes. 60,000 members the culinary union has that are up for grabs here.
And something that was unexpected as well to see this dust up. Jen, what do you make of it? And what do you make specifically of how Bernie Sanders has handled it? Because on the one hand, he's denounced the tactics behind this incident, right? Saying he wants nothing to do if, in fact, these are his supporters. But then he's also saying, hey, it may not even be coming from my supporters. Maybe it's from people who are trying to sabotage me and my campaign. Has he handled this appropriately, and will it hurt him in next Saturday's caucuses?
You know, I think it's hard to tell how it will impact him. I think on the Culinary Workers Union, you know, they endorsed Barack Obama in 2008. That certainly helped him. They didn't endorse in 2016, which is also interesting. So I would also just add to what Abby just said that this also it hurts Biden, because he's somebody who clearly would have loved to have had the endorsement from a labor union, and a labor union he had long supported and worked on their behalf. In terms of how Bernie Sanders handled it, look, he's saying the right things on the campaign trail in his stump speech. He's saying we need to come together, we need to unite. But the problem is there's a movement that he has created and that he's supported and that he's fanned the flames of, that's both online, on Twitter, the Bernie Bros as they're known, but also at a number of these events where they are screaming at other candidates, screaming curse words at other candidates. Elizabeth Warren actually even referenced this in her speech the other night in New Hampshire. I was at the New Hampshire Democratic Party dinner on Saturday. They were screaming at Pete Buttigieg's supporters and at him when he was on the stage. So at the end of the day, it may not be that he's condoning it, but he certainly isn't doing anything to control it. And he's going to need people to support him if he's the nominee, and he's not doing anything to help that right now.
Let me switch gears now, Abby, and ask you about Michael Bloomberg. He's staking his whole campaign on a strong showing on Super Tuesday. You can't turn on television without seeing his ads. Yet he continues to be hounded by his past policies, like stop and frisk. He's apologizing once again for the third time. Let's listen to what he said yesterday.
There is one aspect, an approach that I deeply regret, the abuse of a police practice called stop and frisk. I defended it, looking back, for too long, because I didn't understand then the unintended pain it was causing to young black and brown families and their kids. I should have acted sooner and faster to stop it. I didn't, and for that I apologized.
And that apology was made while he was in Houston after he was just endorsed by Houston's mayor, who is also African American. Abby, is this an issue that will dog him as he tries to win the Democratic nomination?
Oh, it absolutely will. And even one of Bloomberg's senior advisors who spoke on CNN this morning acknowledged as much. And he said this is something that Bloomberg is going to have to continue to apologize for a long time. The question is it going to be a stumbling block for him with African American voters? One of the interesting things about Bloomberg being in this race is that we've seen him really rising much faster among black voters than a lot of the other candidates who've spent over a year campaigning in those communities. And so it really just begs the question whether black voters are willing to look past that if they think Bloomberg is the guy who can actually beat Trump in November. That's the big question.
And we've yet to hear from him on a debate stage. Jen, you made an interesting point ahead of next week's debate when we finally will see Michael Bloomberg. You said perhaps he shouldn't even participate. How would that help him?
If I were advising his campaign, I would tell him not to. The fact is he has the resources, unlike any candidate we've ever seen run, to introduce himself to the American public on television, online, on Facebook, on all the channels that people are getting their information. And he's reportedly spent about $300 million doing that, and this is just the beginning. On the debates, he's also avoided attacking the other Democratic candidates.
Right.
On the debate stage, he may decide not to attack the other Democratic candidates, but they're going to come after him because, as Abby said, he's on the rise among a number of demographic groups that the other candidates have been campaigning to win their support over for the last year. And he's going to have to figure out how to address that.
Abby, Jen, we're going to have to leave it there. I said it to my male panel. I'm going to say it to you. Happy Valentine's Day. I follow you both on Instagram. I hope your husbands step up. I know they will. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Bianca.
Thank you. And coming up, as the deadly coronavirus continues to spread, the head of the CDC warns the outbreak could last beyond this year. Next, Dr. Sanjay Gupta asks the head of the CDC how officials are preparing for a possible outbreak here in the U.S. As health officials scramble to control the novel coronavirus, the Centers for Disease Control is out with a new warning. This virus is likely to stay around even beyond this year. And health officials have growing concerns about it spreading in the United States. 15 people now infected across the country, and more than 64,000 are infected across the globe. CNN Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta joins us now with the latest. And Sanjay, you got a rare opportunity to discuss the outbreak with the director of the CDC. How big of a challenge has this been?
Well, I think this is, it's priority number one, certainly for the head of the CDC, the entire organization. Like I tell you, Bianna, it was a fascinating discussion. I mean, the stance is clearly aggressive containment when it comes to this virus, and you're seeing strategies go into place that haven't been used in this country in 50 years. What I was trying to get at with him was really understanding how they arrive at these decisions and how effective they think they're going to be. Take a listen.
This is going to, obviously be a significant investment.
On the same day, the CDC confirmed the 15th U.S. coronavirus case. I went inside the agency's Emergency Operations Center with Director Dr. Robert Redfield. How good is the public health infrastructure at reporting in? To give you an idea of how rapidly the situation is changing. By the way, the numbers changed. I can tell you that it's actually 15 there. It's a lot to keep up with. What is the worst case scenario here in the United States?
So far, we've been able to contain it, but I think this virus is probably with us beyond this season or beyond this year, and I think eventually the virus will find a foothold and we will get community-based transmission, and you can start to think of it in a sense like seasonal flu. The only difference is we don't understand this virus.
Which is exactly why the CDC wants to be on the ground in China. It's probably Redfield's biggest frustration.
Right now, there's no evidence to me that this outbreak is at all under control. It's definitely not controlled, and the sooner we can help them get it under control, the better for the whole world.
So I guess that does raise the question, why are we sitting here in Atlanta talking about this versus the CDC being in China collecting some of this data?
I don't think it's a medical decision that we're not being invited in.
What do you think it is?
Well, I think it's above the medical.
You think it's a political decision?
I think it's above the medical. I don't think the director of CDC is making that decision.
You think it's a political decision?
Well, I think all I can say is I think it's above the director of CDC because I know he would love to have us a system.
China has accepted help from the World Health Organization. The CDC is waiting to hear whether it's going to be a part of that team. In the meantime, Redfield says his priority is to keep Americans safe.
Our whole issue right now is, as I said, aggressive containment to try to give us more time, but it's going to take, 1 to 2 years to get that probably developed and out, to prepare the health systems to be able to be flexible enough to deal with the potential second major cause of respiratory illness.
And one of the other things I took away, Bianna, from all that was that, when Dr. Redfield talks about buying time, I think essentially what he's saying is that, look, this is a little virus. It doesn't respect boundaries. It doesn't respect geography or borders. It's going to get into these places around the world. Buying time does have value, though, because with that time, you can start to better define the virus, maybe come up with some therapeutics, and maybe a vaccine, which is the thing that everyone's been asking about, Bianna.
Yeah, you could sense his frustration, though. They really want to be on the ground there in China to do more of their own research. Right. But that must have been stunning for you to see the numbers change before your eyes during that interview. Very important story. Thanks so much for the reporting, Dr. Sanjay Gupta.
Thank you.
And coming up, one more sign that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are stepping back from their royal duties. The details up next. There is new confirmation of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's controversial decision to step back from their royal duties. The couple's office at Buckingham Palace will now close. This is far from the first controversy to engulf the British monarchy. And the new CNN original series, The Windsors Inside the Royal Dynasty, tells their complicated story.
We are present at the making of history.
27 million people watch this ceremony.
I know that I'm in love with this girl, and I hope that she's in love with me.
The public totally in love with this ideal couple, and yet the public can't see everything. Edward leaves, and he throws the monarchy into chaos.
Throughout much of Diana's marriage to Charles, there was a third figure hovering around.
She called herself the Queen of Hearts, which really stuck a knife in the Queen.
This was a woman of colour who married into the royal family, and within 2 years of the marriage, she wants out.
there is this terrible balance that they've got to strike between being extraordinary and being ordinary.
Cannot wait to watch this Sunday night. Joining us now, royal historian Ed Owens, who appears in the series as well. Ed, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. You know, we saw a little bit of it there, but this latest challenge to befall the family with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepping back from their royal duties, what impact will that have ultimately on the royal family?
It's going to have a very interesting impact on the royal family. At the moment, it seems that they're not sure exactly what to do with Harry and Meghan. It looks like that in the short term, Harry and Meghan are going to spend their time in Canada. Questions are being asked about who's going to pay for them, whether it's going to be the Canadian government, whether it's going to be the British government. I think the longer this this goes on, the more damage it could potentially do to the royal family. They want closure. They want to know what Harry and Meghan are going to do, and they want them to get on with their new lives.
And of course, everyone's watching their every footstep as well. In the meantime, the premiere episode, just to let viewers know, of this series sheds new light on the abdication of King Edward VIII. That's Queen Elizabeth's uncle. He left the throne in order to marry the woman that he loved, Wallis Simpson. She was a twice-divorced American socialite. Is it wrong? Because some people are doing it. Is it wrong to draw parallels between Edward's decision to step off the throne and compare that to Harry, who, by the way, was never expected to take the throne?
No, there are real similarities linking Harry to King Edward VIII. Both have married American women, both have married divorcees, and it's also the case that those individuals, I think, looked to find women who they, if you like, wanted to rescue them from royal life. Both desired a more private life than the public lives that they were set up to have. And in Wallis, Edward found, if you like, solace, a person who could take him away from the rigmarole of being king, just as Harry has found someone in Meghan who can offer him another life as well.
Ed Owens, great to hear your perspective. Thanks so much for joining us. And be sure to tune in, cue the Royals music. Be sure to tune in the all-new CNN original series, The Windsors, Inside the Royal Dynasty. It premieres Sunday at 10 p.m. Eastern and Pacific, only here on CNN. And we'll be right back.
Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Nia Malika Henderson. John King is off. President Trump tweeting about an interview where his attorney general complained about the president's tweets. The 2020 Democrats are getting more comfortable name-checking each other, and members of Congress, they're just like us. They celebrate Valentine's Day, but they also get questions about Valentine's Day from reporters.
See here. What song puts you in the mood to make lies?
You know what? I've been going back to my roots and listening to a lot of 90s rock.
Nickelback?
No.
We begin the hour with a dose of irony. The president responding to his attorney general's plea to stop tweeting with a tweet. The president today picking and choosing the parts of William Barr's interview that he likes. Barr says the president never asked him to meddle in the Roger Stone case, but the president this morning claims that's still his choice to make. The tweet acknowledges, but it doesn't directly respond to a very direct and very public message yesterday delivered on ABC News.
To have public statements and tweets made about the department, about our people in the department, our men and women here, about cases pending in the department, and about judges before whom we have cases, make it impossible for me to do my job. I think it's time to stop the tweeting about Department of Justice criminal cases.
And CNN's John Harwood, he's at the White House for us. And John, we've been told that the president, that he wasn't exactly surprised by these comments from his attorney general.
Exactly. You know, we've been learning that there was a conversation, or have been conversations in recent weeks, between the Attorney General and the President, with Bill Barr expressing the view that that kind of public outreach or statement by the President is not helpful. But it's not surprising at all. But Bill Barr and President Trump see the issues the same way in terms of the investigation of the president that was conducted by the intelligence community, the Mueller investigation. They're playing on the same team. And I think what Bill Barr was saying in that interview with Pierre Thomas yesterday was that the president has been making it harder for the team to win. The more backlash you generate against the idea that the administration's inserting itself into these prosecution decisions, the more difficult it is to insert yourself. They filed that sentencing memorandum that undercut the career prosecutors, and Bill Barr had a revolt on his hands. This was an attempt by the Attorney General, who has the same views as the president, to quell that revolt.
Thanks, John, for that reporting from the White House. And here with me to share their reporting and their insights, we've got CNN's Jeff Zeleny, Julie Hirschfield-Davis with the New York Times, Torini Parti with the Wall Street Journal, and CNN's Shimon Prokupecz. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Thanks for being here. And Shimon, I'm going to start with you. You, of course, cover the Justice Department. This was certainly something that's unexpected from this particular cabinet member, loyal cabinet member, and we haven't seen cabinet members do this. Why did he do this?
I think most importantly, every indication that we get, he knows that he has a problem inside the Department of Justice. Morale there right now is pretty low. People are kind of fed up with what's going on. And so there's a lot of concern that he needs to rally the troops and try and get people to feel like what they're doing is important. Integrity is the key here. That department needs to hold its integrity. And I think it's taking a hit right now. And he's certainly feeling it. And I think that was really, to me, that was the whole purpose of yesterday. I know a lot of us are making this big deal about this rebuke. Mm-hmm. Is it really real, or is there some kind of, I'm going against the president here and standing up to him? Is that really real, and is that really sincere? I mean, I guess that's something that's going to take time to figure out. But the most important thing in all this was for him to try to get a message across to his troops. It may be a little too late, though.
And I think some Republicans clearly hoping that the president also gets the message from his attorney general. Here's what Mitch McConnell had to say.
Well, I think the president should listen to his advice. I think that if the attorney general says it's getting in the way of doing his job, maybe the president should listen to the attorney general. I think the president ought to listen to the attorney general. He's told the president this is not helpful, making it difficult for him to do his job. I think the president ought to listen to him.
Julie, do we have any reason to believe that the president will listen to his attorney general?
Not much, but I do think that, and John made the point earlier, that part of the reason for Bill Barr to have done this was to essentially telegraph to the president, we're on the same team here. We want the same things. I am helping you. I'm doing what you want me to do. Just don't be public about telling everybody that you're intervening to make me do things, because that will undermine and undercut the credibility of my actions. And I think when you heard Senator Mitch McConnell and Senator Lindsey Graham last night come and have those strong shows of support for the Attorney General, they were in part also talking to the president and saying, and he went on Fox News to do it, which is the best way to talk to the president in many of these instances, let him do his job. He's doing what we want him to do. And so I think that they are really hoping that the president does heed the advice. Obviously, with these tweets this morning, there's not very much evidence that he's doing that.
Right. And Jeff, it was clear that the president knew that Barr was concerned about this, that there is some indication that he told the president that this might happen. But we also know that the president often reacts to things based on how it's covered in the press. How do we think he's going to feel about this going forward after he sees this all over TV?
It's a great question. There's always, or there's generally a short-term reaction. Oh, it's fine. It's totally fine. And then a longer-term reaction after the news coverage sets in. The reaction is not always in real time, because we know the president watches news sometimes hours after the fact. So he'll consume all this. But look, this was not a surprise to the White House. This was not the Attorney General surprising the president. He was very familiar with this line of thought. Our reporting is that he has said that to him privately as well. But it is entirely how this plays out. I mean, if the president somehow seems that he looks weak by this, and he sees the news coverage that Bill Barr is kind of trying to school the president, he won't like that. But the reality is, I would assume the president realizes that this attorney general is on his side. There are myriad examples of when he has, sort of had his back and front. So I think we'll see how this plays out over the weekend and what people are whispering in the president's ear. But boy, can you imagine if you added the attorney general onto the list of people who are on the outs with this president, that would be a real issue. I don't think we have any indication that that's true. What Shimon was saying, it was about inside the building, trying to cool people down. We'll see if it works.
And this is what he had to say, William Barr, about the decision made on the Stone case.
I had made a decision that I thought was fair and reasonable in this particular case. And once the tweet occurred, the question is, well, now what do I do? And do you go forward with what you think is the right decision, or do you pull back because of the tweet? And that just sort of illustrates how disruptive these tweets can be.
And Shimon, do we get the sense that this was kind of choreographed? I mean, obviously Barr is going out there on television. He could have given a print interview. He could have given a radio interview. What's your sense of that?
I think parts of this were choreographed in many, many ways. And certainly based on our reporting, some of the CNN reporting, that he gave the White House some indications of what he was going to do. So I don't think that if he was going to go out there and blindly just go against the president like this and really caught the president by surprise, I suspect we'd be seeing a different response even on Fox News. I mean, last night they were supporting him. So I think that gave us some indications, even more indications, that this was not a surprise. I think the president and the White House certainly realized that the attorney general needed to do something. When you have 4 prosecutors walking away from a case and threats of potentially other prosecutors walking from a case, it's very clear that there's a problem inside this department, and they needed to do something. There is still a problem inside this department. What the Attorney General did last night does not make anything better. People still have issues with it, and they're going to continue to have issues with it.
And we, of course, are looking for this Durham investigation that the president has talked about, and this from the New York Times. The Justice Department is investigating CIA resistance to sharing Russia secrets. Prosecutor John Durham appears to be pursuing a theory that the CIA, under its former director, John O'Brennan, had a preconceived notion about Russia or was trying to get a particular result and was nefariously trying to keep other agencies from seeing the full picture, lest they interfere with that goal, the people said. Jeff, what do you make of that? This will be music to the president's ears.
Well, certainly. I mean, we know that he has no love lost for John Brennan. I mean, he's been deeply suspicious of him, et cetera. So we'll see. This is a part of just the latest example that this is going to be the soundtrack for the rest of the election year. The president likes that in many respects because it keeps things sort of, mixed up and churned up. We'll see where this goes with that New York Times report.
The thing is the Durham investigation, I think there are some indications, obviously, that the president wants to use that to his advantage. And that's what this is in the end. I think if the president keeps talking about this and he keeps raising this issue, it's going to hurt the credibility of that investigation.
Which is why Barr might want to come out now and essentially say, listen, I'm independent of this president. That's certainly the context I saw it in when I saw Barr speaking about it. Thanks, Shimon. We appreciate it. Up next, we turn to the 2020 presidential race. But as we go to break, remember the president's first attorney general and how he was repeatedly berated and belittled by the president, Jeff Sessions. He wants you to know there's no hard feelings and that he's running for his old Senate seat. You're looking right now at some live pictures of Democratic presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders. He's down in Durham, North Carolina, and he and other contenders, they're taking a much more combative approach as the field narrows. And here's Sanders leaving no room for interpretation in his feelings about former Mayor Michael Bloomberg.
Do you think he should be on the debate stage?
Of course not. That is what being a multi-billionaire is about. Some very good friends of mine who are competing in the Democratic nomination, people like Cory Booker of New Jersey, Senator, Julianne Castro, work really, really hard. Nobody changed the rules to get them into the debate. But I guess if you're worth $60 billion, you can change the rules.
And Ginger Gibson with Reuters, she's joining our conversation now. And Ginger, I'm going to start with you on this. It's getting real out there between these candidates. No more sort of nice play between these folks because the field is narrow, and you've got these upcoming contests in Nevada and in South Carolina and on to Super Tuesday.
They're in make it or break it mode. It's either win now or go home, and the stakes are very clear in front of them. We saw Elizabeth Warren in Arlington, Virginia last night take some of her most aggressive attacks against Michael Bloomberg. We see the knives out for Michael Bloomberg, I think is probably a summary here. And I think we're going to see more aggressive targeting of Bernie Sanders, of Pete Buttigieg, and of Amy Klobuchar, especially after her finish in New Hampshire.
And Pete Buttigieg, he finished strong in New Hampshire. We'll see what he's able to do in these much more diverse states, Nevada and South Carolina, jabbing at, as you mentioned, Klobuchar.
I've heard some people say that, my experience is not relevant because you have to have Washington experience in order to become a president. But some of those same voices are among those who voted to confirm Kevin McAleenan as the CBP head, who presided over, for example, the horrifying conditions that children were kept in. And we have to look at what kind of judgment that experience has brought.
Tarini, those opposition researchers doing their job there, digging into Klobuchar's record, because we know that this has been a fight on the debate stage, right? Amy Klobuchar saying, listen, our Washington experience matters just as much as your small town experience does.
Right. I mean, it's clear, though, it's oppo time now for these candidates, especially in the moderate lane, because it is getting crowded between Buttigieg, Klobuchar, Biden, and now Bloomberg coming up. So they're trying to differentiate themselves. And what Buttigieg has been trying to say when he gets attacked on his lack of experience is the fact that experience doesn't matter as much as judgment. We've seen him use that line against Biden, and that's kind of what he's trying to do with Amy Klobuchar at this point. I will say early on in Iowa, there were a lot of voters who were deciding between Warren and Buttigieg, but now when I've been out on the campaign trail in New Hampshire and some other states, I've been hearing Klobuchar's name come up, people deciding between Buttigieg and Klobuchar. So I think this is kind of his early shot at getting some of those people maybe, especially in a state like Nevada that cares about immigration.
Yeah, and Sanders, a strong finish. He, not as strong, obviously, as last go round, but a bit of a hiccup in Nevada with what's going on there with the labor union there. Here's what he said about personal attacks that are being lodged in his name.
Let me be very clear. Anybody making personal attacks against anybody else in my name is not part of our movement. We don't want them. And I'm not so sure, to be honest with you, that they are necessarily part of our movement. You understand, the nature of the internet. It's a strange world out there.
And listen, Jeff, this is something of a new tack, a sort of new framing from Bernie Sanders, saying that he doesn't really know if the Bernie bros are actually Bernie bros. right.
At his own rallies in New Hampshire that evening of his victory party, when Pete Buttigieg came on television, crowds were screaming Wall Street Pete, which isn't the worst attack, but of course they're Sanders supporters. And of course this is the same pattern that Bernie Sanders has done. He has never said anything against them at his own rally. In interviews, he's asked about it, and he says, of course I disavow that, but I'm not sure if they're with me. Of course they're with him. So the reality is we'll see how this goes.
And it's hurt him very much in Nevada because of the culinary union there. A lot of attacks against them because they don't like Medicare for all.
Right, and that's the substance of the matter here. We are about to see this relitigated again. His Medicare for all proposal has been supported by a lot of Democrats. I mean, exit polls in New Hampshire showed that a majority, more than a majority, supported that. But other places, we are not seeing that at all. So Senator Sanders clearly, is probably going to take a hit in Nevada because of his support for Medicare for all. It certainly cost him any type of an endorsement. I'm not sure how much that endorsement of that union matters. They've decided to stay out of this. But this is something going forward about the unity of the party. But there's no question. I was on the road with Michael Bloomberg yesterday as well in North Carolina, and he suddenly is taking delight at being the center of all of this attention. But the question here is, Joe Biden was going after him, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, others. The question is, when he steps out of his television commercial, what type of candidate is he? And
if he ever does, and we don't really know, right?
And maybe I was struck by being at his events how much it seemed like we were stepping into his television commercial because it was just not, as much of a real event. Didn't take questions from voters, et cetera. So keep your eye on him, though. It's
going to be fascinating. And we got some news just in from the Justice Department about the FBI official who authorized the investigation into President Trump. We've got CNN's Shimon Prokupecz, who's back with us here in Washington. Shimon, charges or no charges for Andrew McCabe?
No charges for Andrew McCabe. We're just getting word from Andrew McCabe's attorney that the Department of Justice has decided to drop the investigation into the former deputy FBI director. Of course, important to note that Andrew McCabe is a CNN contributor. We're now getting word from his attorneys that the Department of Justice, which has been pursuing charges looking into whether or not the former deputy director had lied to the Inspector General during their investigation into leaks, whether or not he lied to them about his contact with a newspaper, with a reporter, and that information was subject of an investigation by the Inspector General, who then referred the case for potential criminal charges to the Washington field office, the U.S. Attorney here in Washington, D.C. And it's kind of been in limbo. We haven't had any word on where the case was going. There was a lot of expectation. There was word that perhaps the department was close to charging Andrew McCabe, that there was some word that he was about to be indicted, and then all of a sudden, everything just disappeared. The department would not respond to any questions, certainly to Andrew McCabe's attorneys, for months. They were trying to figure out what was happening with the case. And well, now today, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Washington Field U.S. Attorney's Office, which is the same U.S. Attorney's Office that is handling the Roger Stone case and now the Michael Flynn case as well, and has been handling the Andrew McCabe case. They send a letter to Andrew McCabe's attorney where they say that after careful consideration, the government has decided not to pursue criminal charges against Andrew McCabe arising from that referral that I talked about from the Inspector General. So now, obviously, this is now over. The key question here in all of this, of course, Nia, is how is the president going to respond? Because for months, he has railed against the former deputy FBI director, saying that he was part of this witch hunt. Of course, he and the former FBI director, Comey, all caught the attention of the president, the attacks against them, constant attacks by the president. It was believed that the president was putting pressure on the attorney general to try and build a case against Andrew McCabe. Well, now that is all over. And obviously, the big question is going to be, how will the president respond to all of this? Important also to note, I want to, about the U.S. attorney now, the acting U.S. attorney here in Washington that's overseeing this case is Timothy Shea. He is the same person. He's on the letter. His name is right at the top of the letter. He is the same person who is overseeing the Roger Stone case, the sentencing. He is the same person who was supposed to brief the attorney general about the latest on the sentencing regarding Roger Stone, which started the whole Roger Stone saga of the attorney general being unhappy with the sentencing. And now, again, we have Timothy Shea in the middle of this, saying in this letter that they are not going to file charges against Andrew McCabe.
Shimon, thanks so much for that breaking news, and we're going to bring it inside the room here. Julie and Shimon talked about this, the president's response. I guess at some point we're all going to be checking our Twitter feeds to see what his reaction to this is, because again, this is somebody he thought should be investigated and possibly put in jail, possibly indicted, and none of that's going to happen at this point.
I mean, as Shimon said, the president spent months attacking McCabe. He talked about how McCabe's wife ran for the Senate as a Democrat in Virginia and got money from Hillary Clinton. He was not at all shy about impugning his motives and trying to make it clear that he thought that he should be prosecuted and action should be taken against him. I cannot imagine that he's going to be very happy with this outcome. At the same time, the timing is very interesting, and as Shimon said, the connections with the Stone case are interesting. This could be one of those moves that the Attorney General and the Justice Department are making at this moment to show that there is independence, because the president's constant commenting on Andrew McCabe's case had created problems for the case and for the sort of appearance of impropriety here. And so these things were all tied together, I'm sure, in some ways when the discussions were had about how to go forward with this. And I think we should just all keep our notifications on.
That's right. Let's see.
We may hear something from the president
responds.
pretty soon.
Yeah, we know he will. Next, harsh criticism prompts a new apology from Michael Bloomberg. Controversial policing tactic known as stop and frisk. This after an audio clip surfaced this week from 2015 from a speech in which Bloomberg defended the practice. Here's what he said last night in Houston during a launch event for Mike for Black America.
There is one aspect, approach that I deeply regret, the abuse of a police practice called stop and frisk. I defended it, looking back, for too long because I didn't understand then the unintended pain it was causing to young black and brown families and their kids. I should have acted sooner and faster to stop it. I didn't, and for that I apologized.
And this marks the first time that the billionaire has publicly apologized for the policy since launching his campaign for president. How much do we think this matters for Bloomberg at this point? He's clearly targeting African-American voters. You saw him with that launch. He's been in South Carolina and just nationally up on the air, even though he's not on the primary ballot in South Carolina, visiting places like North Carolina, Texas that have a large African-American communities. What's your sense?
So Bloomberg knows that he needs black voters in order to do well on Super Tuesday. He's put in all of his money essentially on Super Tuesday states. These are states that have big minority populations. And so he's been trying to target them and woo those communities since even before he launched his campaign. He publicly apologized after defending stop and frisk for years. He apologized at a black church for this practice. And since then, they've been really making the case. They're, airing an ad with President Obama in it. And when I talk to voters both in Tennessee and in North Carolina, black voters who attended his events, they kind of said that they accept his apology, that they're trying to move on. They oftentimes compared him to President Trump. Now, these are people who live in states that President Trump won. They know people who are Trump supporters. So what they said is what we hear from people around us is so much worse than what we heard Mike Bloomberg say, that we think that this guy could actually beat Trump, and so we're willing to look past it, is what I heard from at least about a dozen voters.
Yeah, and Jeff, when we're going to play, you talked to some voters as well down in North Carolina, and here's what they had to say.
I think he's the best candidate for the Democrats. I think he's got obviously the most money, definitely the most organized campaign.
I'm very impressed with his commercials. They're very positive. They're they talk about the things that people care about: health care, gun control, and that's what makes me feel good about him as a candidate.
The commercials, inescapable, always on TV. I was talking to an African-American woman, an older African-American woman, who had liked Biden and is now liking Bloomberg, and described Bloomberg, oddly enough, as a man of the people based on all the commercials that she's been seeing.
He's basically living with people in their living rooms, around their kitchen tables. He is on television so much. He does seem like part of the family in some respects. So look, I had the same experience talking to voters yesterday in North Carolina as well, but people also said they wanted to hear him acknowledge it and apologize. He didn't address it at all yesterday while he was in North Carolina. He did last evening in Houston. Look, no one is going to, I think very few people will hold it against him until the very end if he apologizes, but also the language that he used on those audio tapes. And there are certainly more audio tapes out there. He's given so many speeches and things. He'll have to navigate this on a debate stage if he qualifies next week when his other opponents are going after him. We'll see how he responds. The challenge, I think, for Mayor Bloomberg is this has been a very, he's controlled the narrative through his television ads, through data and everything. How is he able to stand up in an environment that he cannot control? I think that is what we will see. We don't know the answer, but people are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because they want to win.
And because of that
$60
billion, the $60 billion that he has. And Joe Biden talking about the vetting idea, and that would be an environment that he can't really control. And this is what Joe Biden had to say. The advantage I have is I've been vetted, re-vetted, and vetted again. If you're reading the paper, they're just starting on Mike. What's your sense?
I think thus far, Mike Bloomberg has been a guy running ads against Donald Trump. And if he makes that debate stage and he keeps going, he's going to be a candidate in the primary. And that's going to come with all of the trappings of a candidate. Not only is he going to have the vetting, he's going to have to answer real time. I would expect Elizabeth Warren to go right at him on a debate stage and press him, not just what the voters want, which is acknowledging the language, as Jeff pointed out, but explaining what it means for him going forward and what he would do in the White House. Right. And you can give a speech off a teleprompter where you say you regret some of the defending it as long as you did. It's different when you have to answer in real time. And I think that's going to be the big test for him if he can make that debate stage.
And Julie, he clearly has the president's attention. He has said that we're scaring the living hell out of Donald Trump and that they're just getting started. Now the president tweeting about him, the nickname Mini Mike.
Right. I mean, clearly one of his, the things that he's presenting to people is why he should be an appealing candidate is that he could take it to Trump. And even though I'm not sure this wins him many voters, you've also seen him trying to really get under the president's skin. He tweeted yesterday about how they know the same people in New York, and behind his back, he says people laugh at President Trump and call him a clown. And again, I'm not sure that really resonates with voters, except insofar as they are really looking for someone who will take on this president in aggressive ways. And as they look at the field and as they look at some of the less appealing information that may be coming forward as the other candidates start to focus on Mike Bloomberg's record, he wants to be able to say, we need to pivot and think about who is best equipped financially and otherwise to take on this president. I think that's the case he's going to try to make.
Yeah, he is everywhere, and we'll see what happens on Super Tuesday, and watch this closely. And as we go to break, the First Lady spending part of her Valentine's Day at a children's inpatient facility in Bethesda, Maryland, helping the kids with some arts and crafts. President Trump threatened to veto the Iran War Powers resolution even before it passed in the Senate, and the 8 Republicans who joined Democrats in passing it aren't nearly enough to make it veto-proof. So that's the end of the story, right? Actually, far from it. Phil Mattingly, he's here on Capitol Hill for us. Phil, what is next?
Yeah, I think what I was struck by with the 55-45 vote yesterday is not necessarily the vote tally, but the fact that they actually got a majority, and not just for the first time. This is the second time a War Powers resolution has passed. And so I kind of tried to take a look in a piece that we did today for CNN.com at why this was happening. And what I discovered is that what's actually happening is a shift. For the better part of the last 2 decades, lawmakers have been extraordinarily reticent to deal with the issues of sending U.S. troops into hostilities. And administrations from both parties have taken advantage of that, using authorizations for use of military force from 2001 or 2002 to really justify a lot of the activities and the hostilities you've seen over the course of the last 2 decades. And that has started to shift. And one of the reasons it started to shift is because of people like Senator Tim Kaine. And in this process specifically, Kaine was making an extensive effort behind the scenes to meet with Republicans, to bring them on board, to listen to their concerns and address their concerns. And I think particularly in the wake of impeachment, kind of a viscerally divisive time in this chamber between the two parties, the fact that he was able to listen and then actually address concerns really struck a lot of Republicans that I spoke to as odd, and they were enjoying it to some degree. And I think the broader issue here is what is happening behind the scenes here is they're building a coalition, and it might not be able to be signed into law this time around, whether it's war powers related, whether it's authorizations of use of military force. But in the future, there will come a time when a debate about military action comes up, and that coalition is there and is bigger and broader and has enough numbers to actually do something that hasn't been done in 2 decades. And I think that is probably more important than anything else right now, Nia.
Phil, thanks so much for that reporting from the Hill. We'll bring it around the table here. Julie, what do we think this means? 8 Republicans, people like Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mike Lee. Is this sort of a blip for this president in terms of Republicans breaking from him, or is this sort of pretending what's to come?
Well, listen, 8 was not enough, not anywhere near enough to override a veto, and that's the important issue here in terms of substantive action. But I do think it does show a certain shift among Republicans. Now, we have seen that while they are very unwilling to criticize this president on most any other issue, Republican senators in particular have been willing to break with him on foreign policy and military matters when they think it really is important. And one of the sort of underappreciated aspects of this particular resolution was after the strike on Qasem Soleimani last month, there were a lot of Republicans who were very angry and upset with the way that the administration didn't consult with them, and then when they asked questions about strategy and what their role would be in future operations of this kind, were basically brushed off.
Yeah.
And so I think there is somewhat of a groundswell of concern about that, and President Trump, in effect, by really not involving Congress at all and acting as if he doesn't need to, and his administration acting that way, his advisors acting that way, has really, I think, supercharged this undergirding or a simmering sort of worry about this issue.
Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, is at the top of that list.
Very upset with this.
He was furious at the briefing or lack of briefing after the Soleimani strike. So look, I think that this is probably a one-off in terms of foreign policy, but it's not just Murkowski and Susan Collins. Senator Todd Young of Indiana, hardly he's a conservative in every respect, but on foreign policy, he does believe in the separation of powers. So look, this is something that Congress has essentially shirked their responsibility in many people's views for 2 decades almost here. So Congress has, been, and people in both parties have been willing to allow themselves to not be involved in this. So I think it's an interesting sign. But Senator Tim Kaine deserves so much credit, I think, for leading the way on this. And it's a sign that, as Phil was saying, there actually can be bipartisan trust.
Getting those 8 Republican senators to come along with him on this very important issue. Up next, the father of one of the Parkland shooting victims has a message on the 2nd anniversary of her death.
Taking decisions intended to please the president. That's what's worrisome to me, particularly with the Stone matter.
All right, so let's talk about Bill Barr, because this was sort of the odd thing that happened yesterday, where he seemed to be telling the president, your tweets are not helpful. They actually make his job impossible, he said. What did you make out about this? Did you think that he was being genuine, especially considering the reporting that he may have tipped off the White House, Katrina?
I mean, to me, he seems like someone who's attempting to manage a crisis inside the department. I mean, you had multiple career prosecutors, removed from the case. You had one person who reportedly removed themselves from the department entirely. I think there's a real crisis of confidence in the leadership at DOJ right now. And I think that for Barr to continue to have legitimacy externally, he has to have some legitimacy internally. And I think right now his remarks suggest that he thinks he may be losing that.
Well, and what would that mean? I mean, what would that mean if he's unable to maintain that internal legitimacy, even as he appears to be doing a lot of things for the president's agenda? And how difficult a situation is that for him, JW, when he's stuck between a rock and a Trump?
It means the department's credibility with the judiciary falls, and judges who have to, make a credibility judgment about arguments that prosecutors, that civil attorneys across the country are making. It's going to change their calculus across all sorts of cases, including the emergency funding cases and all these things.
Let's listen to the Attorney General. This is what he said about the president's right to call for investigations.
Terrorism or fraud by a bank or something like that, where he's concerned about something, he can certainly say, I think someone should look into that. That's perfectly appropriate. If he were to say, go investigate somebody because, and you sense it's because they're a political opponent, then an attorney general wouldn't carry that out.
This comes as the president, he was basically saying he didn't send Rudy Giuliani to do his bidding with Ukraine, but he admitted that he did in an interview with Geraldo Rivera. So keeping that in mind, because that's what's going on right now. What did you think, Katrina, about Bill Barr saying that, knowing the president's already tweeted he's not happy about that last part?
I mean, it reminded me of his confirmation hearing where he was asked, or actually I think it was a Judiciary Committee hearing where he was asked specifically about whether the president had encouraged him or pressured him to take action in criminal investigations. And he really struggled to answer that question from Kamala Harris about it. And to me, it comes across as a bit disingenuous. He can either claim that he's not being motivated by those things or responding to those things, and as you mentioned earlier, he says, I don't read the tweets, but at the same time, he's saying that he feels under pressure from them. So one of those two things can't both be true. I think he is under a lot of pressure from the president, and I think he's trying to walk as close to that line as he can without creating too much blowback from inside the department.
What do you think?
I think the interaction between the president and the DOJ has always been a weak part of our constitutional structure. It has been handled over centuries by just professionalism and by walls of separation that are eroding. Norms. Most other countries don't have this design. They have an independently elected AG or one chosen by the Supreme Court or some other way independent, but we don't have that. I think Barr has been willing to break down all of these norms, and the Stone matter just crystallizes that problem.
Thank you guys so much, Katrina, JW. Appreciate the conversation. And the Nevada caucuses are just 1 week away, and concerns over new technology used to report the results have both caucus workers and candidates worried we might see an Iowa caucus repeat. Plus, the revolving door at the White House, familiar faces are making a comeback as the president surrounds himself with loyalists. Gear from California to the Carolinas. Candidates are fanned out across the country, and the next race is only about a week away now. Nevada's caucuses will be held on February 22nd. And after that disaster in Iowa, the Nevada State Democratic Party scrapped its plans to use apps in its contest. But according to caucus workers and some of the presidential campaigns, how results will be reported isn't entirely clear at this point. We have national political reporter for Yahoo News, Brittany Shepard, here with us. And I mean, speaking of Nevada, we need like pins on a map to say where all these candidates are, right? Okay, you've got Joe Biden, Amy Klobuchar. They are in Nevada today. Bernie Sanders is in North Carolina and Texas. Pete Buttigieg, California. Elizabeth Warren, South Carolina. Just tell us about this diverging strategy here.
Well, right now, a lot of the early primary structure is about math, because right now all these candidates need delegates. So each of them are trying to figure out what's their best bet. So for the folks going to Nevada, they think, okay, they can talk to the first Asian communities voting, the first Latinx communities voting, and kind of banking that they can get those union and lefty delegates to hop on now. And then for the folks going to Super Tuesday, like Bernie, he's kind of betting on that he doesn't really need the rest of those early contests to bank out for him, because if he's 10 points up on Super Tuesday, that's like 100 delegates. Iowa and North Carolina, and South Carolina and New Hampshire can be cute. These are like 40, 50 delegates. But once
Did you say cute?
It can be cute. Cute. You know, like those are just a handful of delegates. What is really powerful for some of these candidates is Super Tuesday, and I think that's why you're seeing everyone's kind of scrambling everywhere.
Okay, so South Carolina, primary is a week after Nevada. This is a very different race. It's such a different challenge than, say, Iowa or New Hampshire. And there's a state lawmaker who said it's really going to be a leap. Someone we talked to who said it's going to be a leap for the black community to be comfortable with candidates like Buttigieg and Klobuchar, who are just now introducing themselves. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it'll be difficult. I don't know if I definitely agree that it's the first time they're introducing themselves. They've been running a presidential campaign for the last year. But when I talk to people on the ground in South Carolina, they still think it's Joe Biden's race to lose. And they don't really take well to be tokenized or being spoken to in a pandering way. So if those two candidates can't actually say, this is my plan for Black America, this is my plan for Southern Black America, I can't see them getting much more than a couple of votes.
So they still think it's his race to lose in South Carolina, or overall, would you say?
I would say in South Carolina. I'm not so confident about overall.
Okay, so because overall he's having a hard time, which even he concedes, right? He says he concedes he lost the first two primaries, but he's always said that South Carolina is his firewall. I've heard some people, they don't really like it being called a firewall, but I wonder what happens if he doesn't do so hot in South Carolina?
Well, the question for some people in South Carolina is like, what's the margin that he wins? If it's 1 or 2%, then he has to completely recraft his pitch to the American public, which has been since day one. I am the only candidate who can do infrastructure to beat Donald Trump. I am running as a de facto nominee. And not winning South Carolina completely scrambles that argument. And so he has to really recalculate everything he has to pitch going forward, and also contend with someone like Mike Bloomberg, who was like waiting just a couple of days later to say, well, you know, so much of what you were thinking, I think I'm the only one who can beat Donald Trump.
Well, let's talk about Mike Bloomberg, because he kind of seems to be getting into the president's head a little bit, right? They almost seem to speak, I don't know, they have a language they can speak to each other, it seems, more so than we've seen with other candidates. Well, what do you make of this?
It's New York sandbox fighting, right? And Mike Bloomberg's campaign has told me and many other reporters that they are the only ones with the capacity to kind of get on Donald Trump's level while still being richer, smarter in their opinion, and better staffed. So yeah, Mike Bloomberg can tweet at Donald Trump saying that people in New York who we both know think you're an idiot, and his staff can say Donald Trump is fat. And I don't know how that plays with all of the voters, but there are definitely some voters who say, oh, well, I like that he can kind of punch where Donald Trump is punching, and it could work to his campaign calculus.
Which would be low, punching low. All right, Brittany, thank you so much, Brittany Shepard. And in the wake of more and more former aides speaking out against him in the past week, President Trump is now surrounding himself with loyalists, including some familiar faces. Plus, as the president retaliates in the wake of his impeachment, details on how he may be trying to stop aides from hearing his calls with foreign leaders.